Okay, so now we've got our math, and it's time to start looking at making decisions. All right, now when you make decisions with an Arduino, there's kind of two primary ways to do it. You either do it with an if-then, or you do it with a case statement or a switch case statement. The if-then is probably the most common. You basically say if, and then you provide it in parentheses a Boolean condition. Boolean means it's either true or it's false. So when you do something like if a is equal to 2, as an example, if it's in this Boolean position here, it's not going to assign the letter or the number 2 to a. What it's going to say is a equal to 2? And the answer can only be yes or no, or true or false. So that's how whatever expression you put here is interpreted when you use an if. And so we call it a Boolean condition, because Boolean means either true or false. And the way it works is that if it's true, it'll do the first clause that's it'll execute the statements within the first set of curly brackets. If it's not true, it'll pop down here to this else keyword, and it'll do whatever statements you've listed inside of the bottom curly brackets. And what's neat about this is that you can just keep adding else. You can add another if right here and then do another else, and you can keep cascading them together to make more and more advanced programs. Okay, so let's do one. Well, let's do this here. Let's pop up our project and let's see how this will work. All right, so I've got int ab. Let's just do some comparisons here and see what this is. So I'm going to leave that it's going to print A is something and B is something. And now I'm going to come down here, and what I want to do is create a Boolean condition where, let's say that if A is greater than B, it'll print A is greater than B. Otherwise, it'll print B is greater than A. And then what we can do is we can change the values of the variable itself, and we can see how it executes one versus the other. So let's start off and say if, and then it's going to say, let's type A is greater than B. And what I'm going to do is I will then type serial print, and let's do a print line. Print line. And I'm going to say A is greater than B. Okay? And if the Boolean condition A is greater than B is true, it'll say A is greater than B. Okay? What will it do if it's not true? Well, then we're going to do else. We can do serial print line, and then we would type B is greater than A. Okay? So those are our situations, and all I got to do is remember these curly brackets, and it should be ready to go. All right, so let's see what happens here. So this should work. I'm going to bring up our serial monitor again. And now in this situation, it typed A is 1, B is 2, and it said B is greater than A. Now, if you look at this situation, it evaluated this if A is greater than B, and it said that's false. Okay, that's not true in this situation. So it did not execute the statements in the first curly bracket. What it did is it says otherwise, it went down to this else, and it printed this. So if I want to make sure that this logic actually works, I can actually come up here, and let's go ahead and make A bigger than B. And now in this situation, it should print A is greater than B. Okay, so this should be okay. And then that will verify that our logic is there. Okay, A is greater than B. Life is good. Now, how could you cascade these together? Well, one of the things you could do is you could say, I'm interested in not only if A is greater than B, I'm also interested if it's equal to B. So I could actually come in here and I could say, okay, if A is greater than B, print A is greater than B. Else, if, and now what I've done by adding that additional if is I have given myself another possibility to add an else. Okay, so if you think about it, this right here is a completely separate if-then statement or if-else statement, but it's nested under the else clause right here. All right, so I'm going to be able to have two Boolean conditions that I'm going to test. So in this situation, why don't we say if, and I'm going to say B is greater than A, I will say B is greater than A. And then finally, so I can print for specifically when A is greater than B, specifically for when B is greater than A. But now what that allowed me to do is I can come here and I can do a print line of B. Let's say A is equal to B. All right, so now we've added a second Boolean condition, and it allows us to cover 3 cases. All right, so let's see if this works. And so we're testing the case where A is greater than B. All right, that's good. Let's go ahead now and test the case where they're equal to each other. And it worked. Okay, and it takes about 10 seconds to compile those things. Okay, life is good. So we have an if-then statement, and you're going to use these like crazy. Okay, another really popular one, same functionality as an if-then, but if you have a lot of different Boolean conditions that you want to do, you can use a switch case statement. And the way that you do that is you say switch, and then you list the variable, and then you list case 1. And for case 1, what you do is then you list do something when it equals 1. And so the way that you would do that is you would say case, well, let's just do it. So let's go in here and let's test A. Okay, so let's do a case statement where I'm going to do an A. And so I'm going to nuke my nuke these guys right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the value of A. Okay, so I'm going to look at the syntax on this, and I'm going to say switch, and the variable I'm going to look at is A. And then I'm going to open up a curly, and I closed a curly, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to say case. I'm going to say if it is equal to 1. And then what I'm going to do is go serial.print, and then I'll say print line. And then what I'm going to do is say A is 1. And that's it. Okay. And then what I can do is I can come here and I can do it again and check to see if it is 4. Okay, so let's do that, and I can print something different. So it's kind of like an if-then statement. Okay, but the cool thing about it is that you have to include these things. You have to include these things called break, and that means that once it does its thing, it's going to jump out of the switch statement. And then, so basically, after this, what I would do is I would come over here and I'd say break, and then after this one, I would do break. And then what's cool about it is that I can have a default where if it's neither of these, then what I can say is I can have something here where I'd say serial print line, and I'd say A is neither 1 or 4. Okay, and that would be the case when it's not done, or not either of this. And then I'll come over here and I'll do a break, and then of course you got to come down here, and that should work. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Let's pop it off and see if it's going to work. We'll bring up our serial monitor, and in this situation it says it should basically say A is equal to 4, or A is 4. Okay, so A is 4, and then this is what the case statement gave us. So these are pretty handy. Let's go ahead and change this to 3 and see if it takes the default route. Okay, so that should pop that. And in this situation, then it takes the default. Okay, great. So we have actually made a decision, and those are the two most common ones you use: if then, if then, and cases. And cases are really good when you have a lot of different things you want to check. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and experiment with playing with some simple if-else statements. So do exactly what I did just to get used to the way the syntax works, and then try a couple switch case statements. Just do a simple one just like I did, and just to get familiar with what you're actually going to be doing.